And welcome to Pub Day Tuesday here on A Mighty Blaze. I'm Robin Kall, reading with Robin. Thrilled to have Michele Filgate on. Michele, there's nothing like a paperback Pub Day because sadly, we did not chat about what my mother and I don't talk about when it first came out. And when I knew this was coming out in paperback, I was like, I'm chatting with Michele.
Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. This book is beloved by so many people. And I'm so happy the pretty pink cover stayed. And it's out today in paperback, and you can visit michelefilgate.com and go to Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, every place. And thrilled to have you here on A Mighty Blaze. Michele Filgate's work has appeared in long reads, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, the Boston Globe, the Paris Daily Review, Tin House, so many places. BuzzFeed, Refinery 29. Currently, she is an MFA student at NYU, where she is a recipient of the Stein Fellowship. She's a contributing editor at Literary Hub and teaches at Sackett Street Writers Workshop and Catapult. What My Mother and I Don't Talk About is her first book. It's an amazing anthology. I read it a very long time ago. And again, thrilled to have you on to celebrate Pub Day here on A Mighty Blaze.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You know, I am especially excited to talk to you today. It's been, I told Michele off air, it's been quite a day here. And if ever there is a day to talk, and just this time to talk about real stories, love my fiction. So no disrespect, everybody knows that. But these essays are heartbreaking, gorgeous, smart, funny, disturbing, everything. And that's kind of how I feel right now. So like, this is the perfect book.
Yeah.
So it came out the first time in a very different world. So that's my first question, and what your thoughts are on this book coming out now and reaching, you know, more of an audience and people talking about it again and sharing their thoughts on essays and their own stories. So, you know, now it's out after, before and after.
Pre-pandemic and after, during pandemic. Yeah. It's very weird to think of how different like the pub day was for the hardcover of, you know, more traditional pub day of actually being in a bookstore and launching it and being around friends in real life. Although I'm very excited that I'm doing a paperback launch for this over Zoom on Thursday via Books Are Magic, which is going to be wonderful.
That'll be awesome.
Yeah. And I think, you know, one of the things, I ran events at bookstores, at indie bookstores for many years. And I think that one of the amazing things about this uncertain time that we're in is that the fact that people can watch these Zoom or virtual events from anywhere in the world. So it has brought the literary community together more. And I think people need stories right now, true stories and fiction, more than ever because of the trying to make sense of the time that we're living in. So I think, yes, it's a different world that this book is coming into, but the paperback edition. But I think that you know, the book came out. It came about because my essay was published in Long Reads right around when the Me Too movement took off in October of 2017. And to see how the Me Too movement has grown over the years and how more and more people are coming forward and sharing their stories, you know, that climate allowed for this book to be published, really. And even though the book, as you know, it's not all abuse stories, there are many different kinds of essays in here about people's relationships with their mothers and what they can't talk about. And that was on purpose. I didn't want it to be like, here is a cornucopia of abuse stories.
Well, when you put it like cornucopia, it sounds a lot nicer, doesn't it?
I know.
It's a cornucopia of abuse stories by Michele Filgate, the backup story. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously my own story is quite depressing. And there are some other stories in here that are really difficult to read, but so important. But there are some uplifting pieces in here too. And that was my goal, was to really show the wide array, the wide spectrum of mother-child relationship. And I say child because it's not just women writers in here. It's not mothers, daughters. There are men in the book as well. And that was important to me, is to have a wide background of people from different areas of the country, different backgrounds, writing about their mom. And so I think that right now, what's interesting is that a lot of people are whose mothers are still alive are missing their moms because they can't see them because of the pandemic.
Right.
Or maybe they're spending too much time with their mothers if they're living with them right now.
It's crazy, right? There's a wide range of that. And just because nothing is as it, normally, whatever that means was. So you're right.
Exactly. And one of the major changes that has happened for me since this book came out is that my grandmother, who is one of the people this book is dedicated to, it's dedicated to both of my amazing grandmothers, but my dad's mom, Mimo, who was really like a mother to me, passed away a few months after the book came out. So it's very different to have this edition come out knowing she's not here. And that's very sad. So
yeah, I did see that as a beautiful dedication, because that's where, it all, you just go back the generations to try and figure things out, to try and see family patterns through a different lens, make sense of things, and as far back as one can go, and depending on how the stories have come through a family, and how truthful they are when they get passed down, really, if you're the kind of person that likes to sort of make sense of the world and pay attention to those things, it's fascinating to know, where we come from and where those stories started.
Absolutely. And I'd love to add something about my grandmother's funeral. My mother my parents have been divorced for a long time, but when they were married, we lived with my dad's mom when I was a kid. Oh. And my mom came to the funeral, and it was a really big deal that she was there because, as you might imagine, it was difficult for her to learn about the fact that I wrote this essay about her being married to my stepfather, the man who was abusive toward me, and the fracture that caused in our relationship. So when she found out about that and the book, things were very, very, very difficult for quite a while between us. And I saw her for the first time after she found out about that at Nemo's funeral. And you could hear a pin drop because she walked into the funeral home and like everyone was just looking at the fact that my mom and I were looking at each other. Wow. And she just walked right over to me and gave me a hug, and we both were crying and saying, "I love you." So it felt like a huge step in our relationship that we were able to do that.
Thank goodness. I mean, that can go, one of two ways, and she came. So just knowing that she came, that was one of the things I was going to ask you when the essay came out, and you write about, once you put it out there, there's that initial sense of who's going to respond or what's going to happen. And I don't know if anybody knew it was coming out or it just came out. So what was, that like 3 years ago?
It was really hard. I didn't tell my mom about the essay. She found out about it. I teach creative nonfiction for a living, and so many of my students are writing about difficult relationships with their loved ones or traumatic experiences. And they often ask me for permission to write about these things. And I always tell them, I can't give you permission to do this. This is something you have to give yourself, because it is extremely terrifying to write your truth and to share it with the world, and to not know what the ramifications, the consequences might be. But I always say, like, even if you publish something in a really tiny publication or literary journal, you should never publish anything thinking that the person you wrote about won't see it, because it's going to get back to them. So you have to think about what that means. For me, it was more important to share this story. I wanted to write for my teenage self who felt very alone. I wanted to write for other people who might find themselves in a difficult situation with their moms and feel alone. And I wanted to start an important conversation, which is why when my essay went viral on Long Reads, I saw this as a conversation with others and wanted to make it an anthology instead of a memoir. So that was, as soon as the piece started to be shared by some of my favorite writers like Lydia Yuknovich, Anne Lamott, Rebecca Solnit, I just started to hear from strangers and people I know, so many people saying, I have something that I can't talk about or couldn't talk about with my mom. And it just was immediately clear that this was a great writing prompt for people.
Wow, when you can connect with so many people, and also that is the thing I love about. I certainly love anthologies centered around a theme that's just translates into so many different ways, and writers will interpret it different ways. Also, an anthology for this time when you can pick up and put down, read one, read two, and it's What My Mother and I Don't Talk About, and edited by Michele Filgate, and it's out in paperback today. And visit michelefilgateyay.com and connect there. But all I could imagine was how many people you must have heard from, because we know our stories are never that unique. I mean, the players change and the defining details, but the essence of so many stories and not feeling alone, I think is, again, just all of these things are so amplified now, even more important than ever. And I do wonder who's sort of taking some of this time to really think about things they don't want to. We put things in places or make sense of them.
Yeah.
Where there's time. So, and as a writing instructor, are you sensing more of that? Because I know writing classes are booked up. I'm hearing like online, you can't get in. You can't get toilet paper or writing class. Well, you can get toilet paper now, but you still can't get a writing class.
Yeah, I've been, so I was in Italy when the
I remember. I was so like, Michelle's in Italy, and I was watching you, and then I got nervous for you because you were there then. But when you left, I was like, oh.
I know. Anyway. I was so sad to leave, but I left in mid-March. I was there for a fellowship as part of grad school because I'm getting my MFA at NYU, and they have this amazing program where you can work on your thesis overseas. So wow. I was working in Florence, and it was incredible. And then it was really weird to be there as the pandemic broke out. And but I wasn't teaching at all. That was just a time for writing. But since I got home in mid-March back here in Brooklyn, I have been teaching 5 writing classes at a time for Sackett Street and Catapult online. And I want to tell you, it's been a saving grace for me, not just financially, because I need.
Hey, there's that. It's practical.
Yeah.
It's okay.
But it has kept me so grounded throughout this really just blur of 6 months. And to be able to work with so many different writers from around the world. I mean, I've had, because it's an online class, people join from all over. And to be able to feel like we're really just all dedicating ourselves to the written word and trying to become better writers has felt so gratifying, even more than it does during normal times. So there's that. That is something that is a positive, and also seeing the similarities, in our stories from wherever, exactly. From, like you're saying. So yeah.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah, a lot of people have been workshopping writing that deals with very serious topics. That's often the case in creative nonfiction workshops, but I feel like it's kind of more than ever right now. Maybe people are sort of feeling like it's now or never kind of.
Yeah, well, I think it kind of is, Michele. Yeah. I mean, if this doesn't get someone's attention, what really will? I have to infuse humor, otherwise forget it. I mean, like I said, it was quite a morning here. So what My Mother and I Don't Talk About, you have different, essayists, and you have, I'm always curious about who you went to first, or did people contact you? Did you have a sense of how you wanted the essays to fall? Was it one of these things where it magically covered a lot? What was that like?
So the way I put the book together is I knew from the get-go that I didn't want to put out a call for submissions because I would be flooded with submissions. Yes. And I've been in the literary community for years now, running events at indie bookstores, and I was on the board of the National Book Critics Circle for a long time. So I've built this huge network of writers, and I knew already I had a bunch of people in mind that I wanted to ask if they had a piece to write about. But it's a little bit awkward too, because it's like, oh, do you have
Yeah.
something like that's like the hardest thing you might ever write that you want to write?
Just share with me, you know, something that's really difficult about, you know, the most primal and important relationship like of life.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Exactly.
But people had different tales, so you weren't necessarily saying you know, weren't putting into a certain category, but I can imagine. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But it was also really important to me that the stories weren't overlapping too much. So I had to see what people had to say. But when I sold the book on a proposal, I already had a bunch of the writers who are in this book lined up, like Alexandra Chee and Leslie Jameson, some of my favorite nonfiction, well, and they both write fiction too, but some of my favorite writers. And then I kind of built up the list as once the book sold, I kind of tried to piece together who I wanted to have in it. And it was very important to me to have a diverse list of writers.
Yeah,
as well.
you really do. Do you want to talk about some of them? And again, that's the thing I love about an anthology. I love memoir. I love anthology. They're all specially, you know, I have a special shelf, and those are the ones I pick up more often and read sections from, whether it was somebody's memoir that really touched me, and it stuck with me so that I knew where to go and what would be relevant at the moment. And the same thing with essays. I love them. And I know it's not easy. Well, you are, like you said, very entrenched in that whole community, but in general, they are harder to sell, and they don't, you know, this one is, I mean, just, it was on every list and just incredibly. So like you really tapped into something, because that's not really always the case. So
right.
Yay you. And yeah, so do you want to just talk about some of them?
Yeah. I mean, there are I love every single piece in this book, but I love to bring up one in particular I'd love to talk about is Naomi Munavirah's piece, which is called Her Body, My Body. And in that essay, she writes about growing up in an immigrant family with a mother who was mentally ill. And I love to tell this story because this was really the hardest thing that this author ever wrote. And she says that actually in her contributor bio in the back of the book. And she knew and told me that before the book came out, she had to show it to her mom. She was really nervous about how her mother would respond, but she sent this essay to her mom and heard back from her. And her mother said that she was so proud of her and that this essay would help so many people. And so we included that as a postscript to the essay. And that's one of my favorite stories, because that right there is what I'm trying to do with this book, is to heal relationships, is to make, is to break, you know, the subtitle is 15 Writers Break the Silence. Right. And it's so important to speak the unspeakable, to articulate what it is that we carry around in our bodies, but don't necessarily always have the strength to say or even face. And so I really was so moved by that. Another essay I'll bring up, again, all of them are so wonderful. Melissa Febos, who is one of my favorite essayists, her essay looks at her close-knit relationship with her mom through the lens of mythology, and it's stunning. I mean, several of the sorry, I've just stumbled on what I was going to say.
No, it's overwhelming. Well, we're on mythology, so right there, you know, it's a little bit of a, you know, thought process of, you know, when I hear mythology and where I go in my mind. But I also, you know, you have your idea of the authors you'd like to ask, and you do that, and then you don't know what you're going to get back. I mean, authors are the most creative, awesome people ever. So how they're going to interpret that prompt and also what their stories are, you know. So you just must have been like, it was getting a present every time somebody must have submitted one to you.
It was, and it was so thrilling to be able to work directly with some of my favorite writers, and intimidating too, because, you know, to give edits to people whose writing you deeply admire.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But another fun story from this book is that I had someone drop out at the last minute, and I was kind of scrambling for space, and my friend Dylan Landis, I was at her apartment, and she was talking about the story that led to her essay in this book, and I said about her imagining her mother having this relationship with this famous artist. And I was like, you should write this for me. And she turned it around, I think, in less than a month. And
Wow.
it's one of my favorite essays of all time. And I told her that it reminded me of Joanne Beard, who is one of the reasons I became a writer to begin with. And she said, that's too funny because that's one of her inspirations. So
isn't that wild? And
yeah.
that might not have, you know, also when you're given a prompt and an essay comes that lives forever, you wonder what the prompt hadn't been there, or that if she did it, you know, turned it around that quickly, it was clearly right there.
Yes,
So,
exactly. But she worked so hard on it. I mean, she's the kind of writer who just gives it her all, and like that's what she does for just,
wow.
you know, she was sitting writing this essay for hours on end each day, I believe, and it's really stunning, as is every essay in this book. There were a few pieces in the book that were published ahead of time that I knew had to be in here too.
Oh, okay.
And those two are, aside from mine, is Brandon Taylor's piece about his mother that was published in Literary Hub that just is absolutely haunting, about growing up with an abusive mom. And but he writes about her with such astonishing tenderness. And his ability to do that is remarkable, in my opinion. And now he has gone on to be longlisted for the Booker Prize for his debut novel.
Yes,
He's
that's
wonderful.
amazing. I love that.
And then the other person who had already been published, it's Andre Osman, who wrote Call Me by Your Name. I love that book and movie. And his essay was published in the New Yorker originally, and it's about growing up with a deaf mother. So, and I thought that was a really interesting topic to include in this book too.
So similarities and so many differences, and like you
Yeah.
say, no overlap, but
No.
the heart of some of the stories.
Well, some of the stories do speak, some of the
Yeah.
essays do speak to each other. There is a natural overlap, but what
Right.
I wanted was for them to speak to each other, but to not completely resemble each other. So that was the goal.
They all play very nicely in the literary sandbox. And
Yeah.
I'm chatting with Michele Filgate and her stunning collection of
Mhm.
essays, What My Mother and I Don't Talk About, 15 Writers Break the Silence. And as we know, like that's, like you said, with the Me Too movement and more of these stories coming out. So like the way you timed that, you know, the stories continue, and
Yes.
we know that that's something that's really incredibly difficult and very important, and people will there will always be people that will connect to stories, and I like what you said at the beginning of who sort of owns that story. And I'm sure some people may feel that they need to show and some people may not, but to your point, especially in this world, if you write it, you'll probably hear about it somewhere. So
yes, yeah.
and how do your students, I mean, would you say when you're talking about that with students and people who are embarking on that journey, do more lean toward the side of like, well, put it out there and see what happens, or they want to check in first with somebody that's included in the piece?
A lot of them want to show it to the person before they do, but then there are people like myself who feel like they'll be further silenced if they show it to that person to get permission, you know? So it's complicated. And I think that I keep thinking of something that Melissa Febos said when I was on a panel with her at a book festival to promote this book. She talked about how when you're writing about something that is, you know, really difficult, you have to have blinders on to the outside world, and you can't think about who's going to be reading it while you're writing it. And I give that advice to my students as well, because I think the moment you start thinking of who the audience is,
Right.
Or an audience being there, then it can paralyze you. And that's part of why it took me over a decade to write my own essay that led to this book, because it's so overwhelming to think of how people you love will respond to it. And I think that is great writing advice, is to just write what you need to say and not think about who's gonna look at it, and then decide whether you're ready to put it out there.
Because that's freeing either way, whether you put it out there or not. And
exactly.
It's that, and that's what I love about creative nonfiction.
Me too.
Storytelling. anybody that's telling their story, they probably don't even realize how fascinating or how relatable.
Yes.
But stories just are, and the power of storytelling. And, you know, for you, having put that essay out and then it, you know, the ensuing book, can you imagine like maybe never having done that, like after you see what's happened from doing that?
I know. Well, I can definitely imagine never having done it because it would have made my life easier in a lot of ways. This has not been an easy thing to do by any means.
Right.
But I am so glad I did it because the fact that this can help a lot of people feel less alone is what really matters to me. And just having conversations about taboo subjects. Like, I think that that's really important. I see it as the job of a writer to be able to speak the unspeakable and to talk about uncomfortable things. And so this essay that I wrote and then putting together this anthology felt really natural. And, you know, there are pieces in here about people who are really close with their moms too. Like I said, that Melissa Febos essay, and I end the anthology on a very hopeful note with Leslie Jamison's essay, where she's so close to her mom that I think she was wondering like what she would write about at first, because you know, how do you make that compelling? But what she wrote about was an unpublished manuscript that her mother's first husband wrote based on their marriage. So she's trying to understand who her mom was before she became her mom. And I think so many of us wonder that. We don't really think of like the person our mother is aside from us. It's hard to separate the mother from the person.
Absolutely. You might have pictures, you might have stories, but really imagining the day-to-day, the dreams, the hopes, the, you know, the things that, those secrets or whatever, you know, that you don't know. So I know it's funny. I ran into somebody at I didn't run into them. They were at my event, and it was a fiction writer but who was doing this event, but the guest said, you know, I would love to be able to write, but I don't know what I'd write about. Nothing horrible ever happened to me. I hope she's not watching. I don't know if she is. People never recognize themselves. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. I didn't know that she wanted to write or whatever. She was talking about fiction, but I thought that was really fascinating. And she probably has a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't want to go there, but like, isn't that like an interesting kind of expression?
It is. Yeah. And I think that's a bit of a myth that you have to have had horrible things happen to you to be a writer. I know plenty of writers who actually had very loving childhoods, and, you know, I think that some of my favorite writers are writing about kind of the intricacies of everyday life that, you know, doesn't necessarily involve the awfulness.
I know. I still think about that. I was like, I got to share that somewhere. And when you were just talking about that story and not knowing where she was going to, Leslie it's Leslie, right? Was going to mine her for her story. But anyway, anyway, such a pleasure to chat with you. Finally, I look forward to one day in real life. And it is Michele Filgate. Go to michelefilgate.com. Follow her on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. And Thursday night, Books Are Magic. And who are you in conversation with?
So Brian Gresco is moderating the conversation with me, Naomi Moonvera, and Casey Lehman. So I'm very excited about that.
So that's at 7 o'clock, I would guess.
7 o'clock on Thursday through Books Are Magic.
Love it. That'll be fabulous. And so mark your calendars. Thursday at 7 o'clock, Books Are Magic. It's Michele Filgate, and it's What My Mother and I Don't Talk About. 15 writers break the silence. Oh, before I really let you go, my doorbell shouldn't be ringing. I'm like, who the hell rings a doorbell? But so I was ignoring it, but then it's like someone's, I'm like, unless I don't answer the door.
Getting a delivery?
Then leave it, right? Just like leave it. I don't know. I'm like, go away. Anyway, what are you reading? And any of your friends' books, or what would you like to recommend? I mean, I can only imagine.
So many. Yeah, I would love to recommend my dear friend Allison Wood has her debut memoir that just came out last week, and it's called Being Lolita. Speaking of breaking the silence about taboo subjects, it's a memoir about being in a relationship with her high school English teacher. and the abuse, and realizing later on how abusive that was, and the power dynamic there. And so it's a stunning book. Yeah, it's a really stunning book. So I'm actually going to be moderating a conversation between her and Lynn Steger Strong, who wrote another one of my favorite books of the year, Want.
Yes.
And Lynn has an essay in this book, but they're doing a McNally Jackson event on, I believe it's August 26th, and I'm moderating that conversation. So that's
August 26th. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm like writing them down in my head, but I'll just go on your page and check that out. I'm actually interviewing on Instagram. Lolita book. Why am I forgetting?
Allison?
Yeah, Allison, I'm sorry. Yes, Friday at 4 o'clock Eastern on Robin Kall Inc. So which, yeah, I have it over here. I was going to show it to you, but then I think my earphones are connected and it would just not be pretty. And I just feel like the doorbell's going to ring again. So those books and any others. And what else are you reading?
Oh, I'm always reading a bunch of books at the same time. There's a book that I just read that I can't say because I'm writing a review of it for the Boston Globe.
Okay.
It'll be out in a few weeks.
Can you whisper it to me?
I can't.
I'll look for the review.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think. I mean, like, I'm always in the middle of like 10 books at once. I'm reading. My professor mentor Darren Strauss has.
Yes.
He has a new book coming out called The Queen of Tuesday, and I'm actually
so excited about
me
that.
too. Yeah, it's where he imagines his grandfather had an affair with Lucille Ball. So I'm interviewing him for Guernica later this week, and I'm really excited to talk to him about
God. I remember, I mean, I'm all things Lucy. I think we're also doing Instagram. I forget, but I am I still fall asleep to Lucy. I've moved from I Love Lucy to Here's Lucy and the Lucy Show. That's what I've been doing. It's comforting.
Very comforting during these times. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know. That's awesome. Well, it looks like we're on the same page, Michelle. This was such a treat. I look forward to chatting with you again. And everybody, make sure if you haven't already picked up a copy, and now it's in the handy dandy paperback size. So it's a great book club pick. You will have incredible conversations.
Thank
you. My mother and I don't talk about, right? Don't you think?
Yeah. Absolutely. And one other quick book I wanted to recommend, I just remembered, is that one of my other favorite reads of the year is Luster by Raven Leilani. Have you read that yet?
Oh, yes. I even got the matching. I'm not wearing it, but the nail polish.
The nail polish. Yes. Yeah.
I know.
So, Raven is like she's the star of my MFA program. She was a year or two ahead of me, and this book is getting all the buzz, and it's so deserved. She's phenomenal.
So deserved. She is so lovely. We did an Instagram live too. That's why I added the Instagram live, and so I have more conversations. They're shorter clips, but Raven and I did it. I was in the car and we were having some problems with the technology. So we did a round 2 the next day, which was great because I'm like, more Raven is awesome. But I said, like, FSG doing nail polish, that was really cool.
I know.
Like, purple, I didn't know they knew what nail polish was over there. So I was like, whoa, that is very cool.
That was very cool swag. Yeah.
Yes, but Luster is a muster.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's awesome. Definitely. So, anything you were reading, well, now I must know what that review is. So I will have to remember to be looking for it. I will stay tuned to the Globe review. Michelle, such a treat to have you here on A Mighty Blaze. Happy Paperback Pub Day to you.
Thank you. Take care.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.